Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications. Today I want to get a little deep on you and talk a little bit about the esoteric history of the world. Now, if you listen to this video the whole way through, you might say, well, I've never heard of this stuff. They didn't teach this stuff in class, right? Well, that's the reason why I'm using the term esoteric history, because esoteric means that which is hidden. The common knowledge of humanity is humans started to kind of come on this planet, about anywhere from 20,000 to 10,000 years ago to 100,000 or so years ago, depending upon who you talk to. Nobody really knows for sure, right? Now, according to esotericism, humanity is far older than that. About 18.5 million years ago is when humanity started to come into existence on this planet and evolved, and from the early animal man to where we are today, right, took 18.5 million years. There's been a lot of history that we don't know about. So there's a lot of folklore and a lot of myths and a lot of legends about some of the earlier civilizations, such as Atlantis, for instance, which did actually exist according to esotericism, and will be the scientific proof of Atlantis will be discovered in the not too distant future, that it actually was a continent that existed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But for now, I'm kind of just focused on the masters part of it and what's happening today, and kind of lead it up to today. So I don't want to go too far back. Right now, the continent of Atlantis was destroyed about 100,000 years ago, and it was depicted in the Bible with Noah and the Great Flood. Now, from an esoteric standpoint, when you read the Old Testament about Noah, it makes sense putting it into this context, right? Now, if you're a fundamentalist Christian trying to put Atlantis into the context of Noah, it might not make a lot of sense. But according to the masters, this is what really happened. And it was destroyed, and Noah was a master at that time, and of course he was trying to warn the people of that time of the destruction of that continent. And it also touched on the decadence of the society of the time, and the people of Atlantis were very materialistic and very decadent, and that was what they were talking about. Now, the masters have been around since the dawn of time, but there were times where they actually worked out openly in the world. People who knew who they were accepted for who they were learning what they could learn from them. People weren't very evolved back then, so I don't know how much they were learning from them. Maybe not that much, maybe a lot, I don't know. But they were kind of leading humanity a lot more directly than they are today. Because for the last several thousand years, millennia or more, the master's work has gone out into the world and has actually done its job through the disciples in the world only. And these masters have been living in very, far away places, away from the wandering eyes of men and women, mountain regions of the world that people couldn't get to, 18,000 feet up, in the Himalayas or Andes or the Rockies, very, very remote and isolated. Now, these masters are conscious of what's going on in the world. They're telepathic, they can communicate to one another, they can communicate through their disciples and so forth. So their work was getting done. They're not living in isolation. Physically they're in isolation, but, mentally and spiritually they're not isolated and lonely. It's just, if you saw them living in their retreats, they would, oh wow, these people look pretty alone, right? But if you really knew and saw life from a master's point of view, well, they were living rich, very productive lives, just not working directly with humanity. And so they didn't have to read papers to know what was going on in the news or something like that. They knew, they just know. And these masters are in total control of space and matter, and can think themselves to another part of the world or so forth, or can pick up on what people are thinking all around the world or whatever. They just know that they know, where most of us don't know that we don't know. So it's quite a different level of experience. And I've mentioned in the videos a few times that the reappearance of the Christ means more than just the reappearance of the Christ. Not only is it the reappearance of a teacher for all religions and for the whole world, even people who don't have a religious belief to speak of, but it's also been going on for thousands of years, and that's my point, is ever since these masters took up their residences in these mountain areas around the world and desert areas around the world, they were hoping and looking for the day and waiting for the day when they could come back into the world, known for who they were, and help teach humanity more directly, because it will speed the whole thing back up. And people won't be able to mislead people. Like politicians wouldn't be able to mislead people as easily if we had God's representatives on this planet speaking to us directly. We wouldn't be able to have the governments of the world lie to us and tell us that UFOs don't exist if these masters were out openly in the world the way they were. You see what I'm saying? So that's why it's such a huge process that's going on. It's far greater than what most people think of when they think of the return of the Christ, even as great as that could be, right? It's far greater than even that. And like I said, nothing less than the total transformation of the hearts and minds of everyone, man, woman, and child on the entire planet from now on, right? It will be changed because of what's been going on, not only now, but over the last millennia. And it's been a slow process, but these masters, their work has been going out and getting done through these disciples in the world. Great disciples like Jesus or the Buddha or Muhammad, down to lesser disciples that we might not even know them by name, for instance, but even some of the lesser disciples like, I don't know, Einstein or Picasso or Martin Luther King or, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some other people. Anyway, you get my point, right? So, it could be anybody, man or woman, who's impacted society on any level is a disciple, be it good or bad, effective or not, I guess, of one or other of these masters. And most of the time, 9 times out of 10 or more than that, maybe, these people living in the world doing the work of these masters have no idea that their muse for creativity, or if they're an artist, or their impulse and their ideas for a political change or whatever, are actually coming from a whole other realm of beings called the masters. They just come up with an idea, or come up with a creative process, or a new type of music, or something like that. A new way of living, or something. Or they might just be a religious teacher, or a spiritual teacher, or a philosopher, or something like that. But whether they were aware of it or not, they were working out parts of the plan. Now, some of these masters, such as Jesus, such as Muhammad and the Buddha, but also disciples like Einstein, or Mozart, Rembrandt, or Leonardo da Vinci, were consciously working with these disciples. Like Benjamin Creme, for instance, were consciously working with these disciples moment to moment to get some pretty cool work done. And it was hoped by these masters that, like I said, eventually they would be able to come back and start to teach humanity and guide humanity directly. And it was hoped that they would be another 1,000 years from now. So looking at that, we're in the year, 2019? So another, the year 3000. That's a long time away. That they were thinking that humanity would then be ready in another 3,000 years. So as long as this has been going on, for people like me, but there's some people who've known about Maitreya for even, being back in the world longer than I have, even, 40 some odd years. Well, that's still way ahead of schedule, and the reason why he had to hasten his return is because of the invention of the atomic bomb, because that we could actually destroy ourselves if given a chance. So he had to come back to kind of make sure and to guarantee that we wouldn't do that. And that's part of I think the reason why it's going on so slowly now is because humanity is still really not really ready for all this. And you can kind of see it when you talk to people, when people like me talk to people about Maitreya. There is a eagerness for it or readiness for it in some people, but some people are very, very turned off by it, of course, right? It's just natural. And that's my point. Now, in the mid 70s, five masters entered five major cities, the five centers of the planet. One entered New York. Now, according to Ben, this is in no order of importance. This is just the way they entered the world. So one left their residence, their remote residence, and went into New York. The next one went into London, then into Geneva, and then into Darjeeling, and the last one into Tokyo. And these five cities that I just mentioned, New York, London, Geneva, Darjeeling, which is in India, and Tokyo, make up five of the seven chakras of the planet, the energy vortexes in the planet. But they came into those centers. And then two more followed immediately after that, one into Rome and one into Moscow. According to Benjamin Creme, the one that he's able to talk about is the one that entered Rome, and that was the Master Jesus. Jesus had been living in the deserts in and around Syria, actually, for hundreds and hundreds of years since he was Jesus, as we know him. But he eventually entered Rome and has been living in Rome since the mid-70s. So what's that, about 40-something years now? And Maitreya in 1977, and actually July 19th, 1977, left his retreat in the mountains of the Himalayas and then came into Pakistan and then flew from a plane. He didn't have to fly in a plane, but he flew in a plane from Pakistan to London. And he did that in order to fulfill the prophecy of coming in through the clouds. And I kind of thought about that for years. Like, why would he do that? And I'm really thinking that some of the times when these masters fulfill these prophecies, such as Maitreya or Jesus, 2,000 years ago, he did things in order to fulfill the prophecy. And other times he did things and it just happened to fulfill a prophecy. Now, I don't think all the prophets of the Bible were true prophets. I think some of them were guessing, or some of them maybe just said what was on their mind, like, oh, the Christ is going to come back from the clouds, and this, that, and the other. Now, and then he came back, like I said, he could come back in the clouds just the way it was predicted, but that's not what he's wanting. That's not his style. His style was to keep it simple. The KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. But if you think about it, and you watch these videos of people talking and scoffing about it, why would he come back on a plane? He doesn't need to come back on a plane. Of course he doesn't need to come back on a plane. He never had to come back on a plane. He can think himself anywhere in the world if he really wants to. Speaking of Maitreya. And Jesus could do the same thing too if he wanted to. He's a master. He's in control of time and space. And matter. But just as he did in Palestine, where he, how did he, he was predicted to come into Jerusalem riding a horse, with this, blaze of glory, so to speak. But how did Jesus ride in there? On a donkey. Very simple, very humble. The same thing that happened on July 19th, 1977. And it's such an esoteric event that if you line up 1,000 people, not one person probably would know that July 19th, 1977 was any special day that happened in history. Right? I don't even know what happened in history outside of that. I know Elvis died in August of 1977. I remember that, but I don't even remember what I was doing on July 19th, 1977. And so it was just a very simple, very quiet day, but it's a day that is historically one of the most historically anticipated days over the last 2,000 years. And it came and went, and nobody noticed it. Just like today. Maitreya's on TV today. Nobody notices him. Just like the Antichrist was, working out, the energy working out through the Axis powers back in World War I and World War II. Came and went. Nobody recognized it as that. We as people and as humanity don't see things. We're blind, to what's going on around us a lot of the times. And I did a video where I was talking about how separate people are, right? And that's part of it. We're just live totally disjointed, combobulated lives. And, the media doesn't really speak on a lot of this stuff, of course. And that's the reason why we missed it. Now, it's not the end all and be all of it. It's going to be going on for the next, the reappearance of the Christ is going to be going on for the next 2,000 years. So if you missed it already, well then, we'll eventually all get on board and it'll be fine, right? But my point is that esoterically, these masters have been working behind the scenes since the dawn of time, and will continue to work behind the scenes until Maitreya eventually declares himself on the day of declaration. And like I said, that's when the whole thing's going to start kicking it. As they say, the poop hits the fan in a good way, not in a bad way, but in a good way. And when we start to look to them for guidance about the way and solutions for the way out of our problems, and not to our own politicians and our own scientists, and then eventually we'll be able to ask the men and women from the stars and other planets, how do we do this, and what's the technology that's getting you guys to be able to fly from point A to point B in a matter of seconds, and how do you regenerate an organ from nothing but light, those kind of things. And imagine where we can be in 100 years. And to refer back to another video I did earlier, that's the reason why I don't think it's going to take us thousands and thousands of years to get it right. Once we start to get access to this kind of information on a daily basis from these wonderful great masters that we have already in our midst, it's going to set the world afire and change everything for the better. So I want to stop there, and we'll talk more about it. And as always, take action. Help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos. Have a great day.